Hi everybody and welcome back to a new episode of DiagnoseDan. Today we're working on a 2019 Mercedes-Benz A-Class, and this car is a crank no start. Now that's not the only problem with this car, but we'll get to that later. Now this is a real bizarre story. Now according to the previous owner, but I do think we need to take that story with a pinch of salt, this car suddenly became a crank no start about a year ago. Since then, it has been to several shops, but in the last year, nobody has been able to fix this car. A few days ago, the customer called our company, and you know what? One of our sales guys picks up the phone and gets into a conversation. The customer tells the sales guy that he's really fed up with this car and he'd rather sell it. Now, before I knew it, our company bought this car without ever seeing it. Now, yesterday, this car was towed into our shop and it's a lemon. It's low on coolant. Every warning light that's available is on. It doesn't move, it doesn't crank, it doesn't start, so no pressure, but let's see if we can diagnose this car together. Now, in all fairness, we didn't pay a lot of money for this car. What we paid for the car is probably worth in parts. Now, the car is probably worth 10,000 more if it was perfect. Now, it's far from perfect, but if we can get it to crank and run and move again, which it hasn't done in the last 12 months, it's probably worth 5,000 more than what we've paid for it. Now, if we make it perfect, we can potentially make 10,000 more. But in this video, let's focus on at least getting it to crank, start, and move again. Now, as you can see, the car was towed into my diagnostic bay, and the customer told us that about a year ago, out of the blue, this car became a crank no start. Now, I don't fully buy that story, because why, for instance, is there no coolant in the reservoir? Now, in all fairness, we don't know what the other workshops have been doing, but what he has been speaking the truth about is that this car hasn't been going anywhere in many months. It has been sitting and collecting dust. Now, let's start out by confirming the complaint and let's try to crank this car over. Now, let's start out by reconnecting the battery terminal. And let's see if we can crank this car over, which would be a miracle because it hasn't been cranking over or starting for the past 12 months. But hey, you know what? Maybe we get lucky for once in our lifetime. This is the key, by the way. And right away, we're getting a parking brake malfunction. So I'm pushing the brake. Let's start to crank the car. Let's try to start it. But as you can see, the car is not responding. So that's customer complaint confirmed. Now, I quickly hooked up a battery maintainer because the battery voltage was getting low. In the meanwhile, I took a full scan of the vehicle and there are many fault codes stored, and I was kind of expecting this. Now, we gotta start somewhere, and I saw a fault code in the electronic ignition lock, and it says the buffer battery of the electronic ignition lock has a malfunction. Now, I'm not sure if this would cause a crank no start, but it's probably pretty easy to fix. So in the next step, we're gonna take a look at that auxiliary battery. Now, another fault code I saw in the SAM module is also quite interesting. First of all, coolant level sensor has a malfunction. We already know that the coolant level is low, but the other fault code, relay 1, circuit 15, has a malfunction. The actuator doesn't close. That's rather interesting because circuit 15 is ignition on. Now, the relay for ignition on is not closing, or the computer thinks it's not closing, but that could definitely cause a crank no start. So in the next step, let's first take a look at that auxiliary battery, and after that, let's take a closer look at that terminal 15 relay. Now let's go into the ignition lock and let's select power supply. Now when we select power supply, we can see that the main power supply for the main battery is 14 volts because we're hooked up to a battery maintainer. But the voltage for the additional battery is 0.3 volts, and that's no good. Now let's take a closer look at the vehicle itself, and it actually comes up with a warning message for the backup battery in the instrument cluster. Now it is in Dutch, but you can see that it says, hold on, this is for the parking brake. And now it says backup battery malfunction.
Wat wilt u doen?
Hold on, don't start talking to me. Now, the backup battery is underneath the center console. So let's take a closer look at that backup battery. Now, getting access to the auxiliary battery is pretty easy. Just pop off the cover of this armrest. Underneath there are 3 screws, unscrew them, and there are 2 more screws at the back, and then you can lift up the center console and gently put it to a side to get access to that auxiliary battery. I gently put the center console to the side, and underneath there we got pretty good access to that additional battery or auxiliary battery or backup battery or parking pole battery, whatever you want to call it. It's in its own little tray. There are 2 clips holding it down, and a positive and a negative. So let's get it out and let's see if that battery is any good. Now, this is the original battery we just got out of the vehicle. It's a 12 volt 1.2 amp battery, and this is a known good battery we've got laying around the shop, non-original, but also 12 volt 1.2 amps. Now let's test the original battery, and you can see it has only got 0.25, 0.26 of a volt. And let's test the known good, and it has got a healthy 12.8 volts. So let's install the new battery. Now, this tiny battery goes by a lot of names. It's called additional battery, backup battery, auxiliary battery, but according to official Mercedes-Benz service data, this battery is called a parking pole battery, or at least on this model. Now, what this little battery is responsible for is when the main battery loses power, this tiny battery is still capable of engaging the parking pole of the automatic transmission. And that got me thinking, when the car is not in park, of course it won't start. So could this tiny battery be responsible for our crank no start? I guess we're gonna find out in a minute. But before we do that, let's find out and do a little test if this tiny battery is responsible for engaging that parking pole. As you can see, the tiny battery is not installed. And as you can see, the car is in park right now. Right there. Now, let's see what happens when we disconnect the main battery. There we go. And you can see we can still roll away the vehicle, which makes sense because there is no power source to put the car in park. Now, let's install the parking pole battery, and let's see if we disconnect the main battery, if it then goes into park. Right now, the parking pole battery is installed. The car is still in neutral, as you can see. Now let's see what happens when we disconnect the main battery. Let's disconnect it. There we go. Let's pretend we're trying to start the vehicle, and you hear a click. And now we can no longer roll away the vehicle, and the vehicle is in park. Now let's reconnect the main battery, and it should indicate that the car is in park. And as you can see, it does. I installed the new auxiliary battery, and by the way, we no longer have got a message for the auxiliary battery in the instrument cluster. This is the old one. I put everything back together, so the moment of truth does this car now crank. Has this tiny battery resulted in a crank no start that nobody has been able to solve over the last 12 months? For us, it would be fantastic. Moment of truth. But unfortunately, hold on, we still have got a crank no start. This video was made possible by DiagnoseDan, the world's biggest automotive aftermarket bulletin supplier. If you got a workshop in Europe, DiagnoseDan is a must-have. Simply enter the license plate number or the VIN number, and the system will automatically select the vehicle for you. then enter a fault code or a symptom, and the system will search through thousands of known fixes for the most likely solution. If it doesn't come up with a solution, you've just wasted 30 seconds. If it does come up with a solution, you've saved yourself hours of searching for the problem. For only 365 euros a year or €1 a day, it's an absolute no-brainer for a professional workshop. If you want more information, please visit DiagnoseDan.com. Unfortunately, the tiny auxiliary battery didn't solve our issue. It did solve a issue, but not the crank no start we're trying to solve today. So let's focus on the next fault in the list, which is the fault code B212172, relay 1, circuit 15 has a malfunction, the actuator does not close. Now I took a look at Mercedes-Benz service data, and that relay 1 for terminal 15 is actually located in the fuse box under the hood. So let's take a closer look at that relay. I took a look at the wiring diagram, and this is actually relay 1 for terminal 15, and this relay is basically responsible for powering up a lot of stuff under the hood when the ignition is turned on. Now I also saw that right next to it is the starter motor relay, and I was thinking, has anybody checked the starter motor? What if we just got a bad starter motor? Now before we get too deep into that, I want to quickly check if the starter motor functions at all, and we can very easily do that by removing this relay and providing power to the starter motor ourselves. Now as you can hear, there's nothing wrong with the starter motor itself. So let's continue with our initial plan and take a closer look at the terminal 15 relay. Now since we've got a fault code for the relay not closing, we could simply have a bad relay. So let's start with testing the relay first. Now I'm gonna test the relay using my relay tester. Now some of you might say you can just swap around the relay or test it in other ways. And I agree, but I prefer this method because this tool is gonna test the relay 10 times. It's gonna open and close it 10 times, look for the values, and when it's a good relay, a green LED lights up. Now, I'd rather test than guess, and since it's so easy, we're gonna use this tool. So let's push the button. It's gonna go through a test cycle, and if the relay is good, a green LED will light up. And the green LED does light up, so there's nothing wrong with this relay. Now this is a 4-pin relay, and a 4-pin relay needs 2 power sources, one for the control side and one for the load side. So on 2 of these 4 pins we need to have a power source. So not on this one, not on this one. There's a power source here and a power source there. So we do have got 2 power sources at the relay, so nothing wrong with the power source. Now in the next step, we need to find out when we turn on the ignition, the relay is actually being commanded to close. Now I took a little look at the little schematic on the side of the relay, and I found out that this pin should provide a ground to the relay when the ignition is being turned on. This is a ground side switched relay. So I hooked up my test light, and when this pin is provided with a power, you can see, or sorry, with a ground, you can see that my test light lights up. Now let's put it in the control wire for the relay, and let's turn on the ignition and see if our test light lights up. Now I'm going into the car while you guys take a look at that test light. Now I'm going into the car right now, and I'm turning on the ignition right now, attempting to start the car, and I'm looking through the window, but it looks like our test light is not lighting up. So it definitely looks like we've got a control issue. Now this is a 4-pin relay, and this pin and that pin are power sources, and the other pin is the control wire. Now the final pin is the pin the power needs to be switched to when we close the relay. Now to see if we're on the right track, I want to see if we provide this pin with a power ourselves, if the car will then crank or start up, just to see if we are on the right path. If it doesn't, we've got more problems. Now I'm going to use the power probe to power up this wire. And I like to use the power probe, by the way, you can see the wire is powered up. I like to use the power probe since it's safe to use and it has got a fuse inside. Now let's power up the pin that the relay is supposed to power up when the relay closes. Now let's go inside the car and let's see if it does more than it did before. Now I've got the key right here. Now let's hit the start button. And it actually starts. Oh, and it fires up for the first time in 12 months. After 12 months, this car started and it ran again, and it actually sounded pretty decent. But we're not out of the woods yet. Why is that relay not being energized? Now to find out, I printed out some service data and a wiring diagram, so let's take a closer look. So I printed out a wiring diagram for our relay, but unfortunately the relay we are looking for is exactly on the edge of the paper. So I'm gonna split it and we're gonna focus on this piece of paper. Now this is the control side of our relay and it's getting its power from a common power source. Now the control side is being controlled through this wire from a module that's called N10. Now it's being controlled through a red and pink wire over here. So in the next step, we need to find out what module N10 is, where it's located, and we need to find that red with pink wire. Now the red with pink wire was actually quite easy to locate as it is right there. You can see it's a red wire with a pink stripe that goes directly to the pin of that relay. Now, if we wiggle that wire, we can actually see the pin wiggling right there. So that was easy enough. Now we need to find out where that wire is going to, what module is responsible for controlling it, and where is that module located. Now I found out that module N10 is actually the front SAM control module, a body control module that supposedly lives somewhere underneath the carpet right there. I'm gonna dig it up, and once I got access to it, we're gonna take our testing from there. I had to remove this trim, I had to fold back the carpet, and I had to unscrew this panel. And when you do, you can fold it back and then you get pretty good access to the back of the fuse box and N10 module, or the front SAM module, right here. Now, when I took a closer look, I could actually see a red wire with a pink stripe right there in a big white connector. Now I'm going to take a look at a wiring diagram to make sure that's our wire. And when we make sure that that's a wire, we're going to take our testing from there. Now I took a look at a wiring diagram and I confirmed that the wire I pointed out is actually the wire we are looking for. It's on that big white connector on pin 31. Now I took that connector apart and actually depinned the red with pink wire from that connector. What we can do right now is we can manually energize the relay. Now if we ground this wire and the relay doesn't close, we probably have a broken wire. If we ground this wire and the relay does close, then somehow this module is not controlling that relay. I connected a crocodile clip to that control wire, as you can see, and I hooked that up to my power probe. What we can do now is manually energize that relay while we're attempting to start the car. Now when we take a close look at this power probe, we can see it's receiving a power. When we disconnect this wire, the red LED goes out, and that means the only place the power can come from is through this wire, all the way through the relay from the power side of the relay. So basically this means our entire wire integrity is good. There's nothing wrong with the wiring. Now if we do provide it with the ground and we're very quiet, we can actually hear the relay click. I don't know if you guys are picking this up. Now this basically means that our wiring is good, and I have no doubt when we provide this relay with a ground, the car will start up. Right now we're providing the relay with a ground, so the relay closes. Let's try to start the car. And sure enough, the car fires right up. Now off camera, I did a lot of measuring. I measured powers, grounds, I took the connectors apart, checked the wires, checked pin drag, but I can absolutely not find a reason why this module wouldn't control that relay. Now, another fun fact, when we started this diagnosis, there was actually a fault code stored for the relay not closing. That fault code was stored inside this control module. So this control module is complaining about the relay not closing, but it is responsible for closing the relay itself. And that makes me believe there's actually something wrong with this module. So I'm gonna call the shot. We're going to order a new SAM module. Now, once you disconnected all the connectors, you can actually very easily click out the SAM module and it can very easily be removed. Now, a quick update on the Mercedes. After I called it a bad module yesterday, I went online and ordered a new module from Mercedes-Benz. Within the hour, they replied to me and sent me a message, and they told me that the part number I ordered is no longer available. That number is now superseded. Not only is the number superseded, but the price also changed. The price went from €266.16, which I think is a fair price, to €172.63. I got a 14% discount, so I paid €148.46 before taxes. Now, normally it's the other way around. Now, not only did it become a lot cheaper, but it also came in this morning, so I'm super excited. Very good service from Mercedes-Benz. Let's plug it into the car and see what happens. Now, I plugged in the new module. That's the old unit. Now, I still need to program it, although I think we can do that later. I think it should work without programming, although we might get some fault codes. Now, moment of truth. Let's hit the start button. Oh yeah, and it fires right up. Now, let's release the parking brake and let's put it in reverse. And for the first time in a year, this car is moving again. Now, we still got some warning lights and some fault codes, but I still need to program the module, and we will see after programming what remains. Now, if there's something interesting, I will also film it and take you on that journey. Now, we had a €10,000 budget, and so far we've spent about 200 on the module and the battery, so not a bad outcome. Now, I opened the old module to see if I could see something, but I see absolutely nothing. No water damage, no loose contacts, no loose solder joints, so I don't know what went wrong with this one. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, DiagnoseDan fixed it again. See you next time, guys.